Welcome to Climate Courage. I'm Andrea Edwards.
And I'm Samantha Gafer.
And I'm so happy to have you here. I hated doing it by myself last week. I love the conversation and the banter. Well, I'm always out of that. But yeah, it's just the other perspectives, and I think different people pay attention to different things, and it's really important to hear different perspectives rather than just your own, because you can easily go down your own rabbit holes if you're not careful, right?
Absolutely. It's what we were talking about with the LinkedIn algorithm. Like, are more people talking about climate change, or am I just seeing more of it because that's what I'm talking about?
Exactly. No, definitely the conversation has gone through the roof. So just a reminder, Climate Courage, this is about focusing on the actions that we can all take. The only way that we can survive in the future is if we do implement systemic change right across the board. But in the meantime, while that's not happening, how we think about it, what we do, the actions we do, how we vote, that all matters, right? So that's what we're here to really talk about. And the topic today is where I'm living safe. And I thought this was a pretty early important one to sort of talk about. It's not about creating a sense of panic. It's just about saying it's time for us all to take responsibility for where we are, because this isn't actually about us. It's about our children's future. And some of us are living in places that will be unlivable as we move forward. So that's kind of the gist of what we're doing today here. But Sam, I've got a bit of a quandary that I wanted to share with you.
Sure.
Lots and lots of people talk to me about their dreams for the future, and I'm forced to bite my tongue because I don't want to be that person in the room that's always saying, well, you can't do that, because no one's going to invite me anywhere. And I'm sure the invitations have already started dropping off anyway. But, like someone recently told me a story how they wanted to sort of move out to this sort of farm area and have a farm. And I'm sitting there going, but it's going to be too hot to live and there'll be no access to fresh water. So that's not even possible. And then I have other friends who are either buying or renovating homes. And I know that before the end of this decade, the ocean will be coming down their road. And I don't want to tell people that. I figure, we need to sort of be aware of what's coming at us and then make decisions, that are going to mean that, we're not left with a stranded asset like a house, right? But it's a difficult one. Do you find yourself in that position?
Yeah. And I think it depends on who it is. And it's, ironically, I was hiking this morning with a bunch of women here in Malaysia, most of whom have husbands who work for Shell.
Right.
And I was talking about coming on to do this with you today and what it was about. And one of the women was like, oh, like my son is doing a project on that. And they're from Texas.
Yeah.
And I was sort of saying, well, like, have you thought about it? And she's like, oh, I think we'll stay abroad until the kids are done school and da-da. And I was like, well, but, have you looked at any of the climate maps to look at where your home is and whether or not it'll be safe? And she was like, no, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
And a part of me is like, is that a strategic choice, right? Because if you do know about it and your life is embedded in Shell, then you have other conversations at home you need to have. Or is it just literally not aware? And so I sent her the heat map and the flood map of the states when I got home, because okay, maybe you don't ever talk to me again, but maybe you also end up being somewhere that's actually hospitable for your 3 kids. And I don't know, I'm willing to take that gamble. So I think it depends on who it is. I think it's harder when it's family. It's harder when it's somebody who is in denial. It's a lot easier to me when it's just someone who doesn't know.
Yeah.
Because then it's more about like, well, maybe look at what's that? We come from a town on a lake in Canada where we're very lucky because sea rise isn't going to affect the lake. But we've always joked, like, you don't want the house that's on the beach. You want the house 3 streets up from the beach. Because, it's the reality. And I think people do need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I just look at it like sharing information. without
Yeah.
quashing dreams, just say like, hey, well, have you considered whether you'll be able to insure that house in 10 years?
Yeah.
Then you're not saying don't do it, don't build it. You're just saying like, hey, I'm concerned about
Yeah.
your interests here. So here's some more information. And I just sent the links,
Yeah.
I didn't talk about it much on the hike.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
afterwards I was just like, hey, this is, a little bit of what we were talking about. And she was like, oh, thanks. Like,
Yeah.
your husband
Nice
might
one.
not thank me when he gets home from work today, but
Yeah. Yeah. So when I talk to people, most people go, but it's not going to happen till 2100, right? And basically, if you're under 65, you will experience catastrophe in the country that you live in. So that's I think if you
if you
can just
haven't
remember that.
already.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, but and we're gonna hear about somebody's experience of catastrophe and really understand, what it's like. But what's happening in the environment now wasn't expected till 2050, according to the climate scientists. They're shocked that 1.2 degrees global warming is here, and this is what it's creating. So everything is now happening faster. The weather is more severe. It's happening more frequently. Larger and larger areas are being impacted. And this is all happening, and we're not even being told, or what we even believe is not aligned with the truth of what we're facing. So the question is, what can we do about it? When should we do something about it? You don't want to make a decision too soon, but you don't want to make it too late either, because if you make it too late, then you're in the migration when millions of people will be moving, and then it's much more difficult. But it's actually a really, really, really complicated topic, and I've been looking at this for years, and I still don't know the answer to the question, because our priority now is not us, it's our children. Where can we put them on this planet where they have the best chance of survival? So any decision we make is for them, not for us. And I still don't know the answer to that, because there's so many variables in the mix. So I'm not surprised people are confused by it, but we'll talk about some of the things to sort of really start paying attention to so that we can be responsible. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to a very, very special guest. And it's my friend Kate Marsden, who I met in Singapore. We only actually ever met once, maybe twice in person. And most of our friendship has actually been built digitally, but the bond was strong. And her family lost everything in the floods, or one set of the floods in Australia this year. They've had a terrible time since. She's just moved for the 6th time this year. So please welcome the lovely Kate Marsden. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited you said yes.
Thank you. And just before I kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners of the land that I'm from here, the Yuggera people, and I'm coming from Mianjin in Brisbane, Australia. So I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. So thank you so much for having me. And yes, the floods. Yeah. So just to touch on, I was listening to your introduction then, Andrea, and making a few notes. And yeah, like there's just so much to say about this. I'll start on my own story and just kind of, give a brief account of what happened at the end of February. And I think the thing that we need to kind of think about and talk about is the mitigating circumstances of that, and just what chaos it just throws society into, and it just completely unravels everything. It's been a really hard year, but I'm always inclined to be positive and cup half full. And I've seen just the most incredible acts of kindness and community. And I feel like Australia has really listened to the messages. And, we voted in the right way. So that's good. But let me just go back to what happened at the beginning of the year. So we moved from Singapore in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. Don't recommend. And we came back to Australia to kind of, put down roots. I've been away for 10 years and just give it a shot and see how it goes. and moved into the same neighborhood as my sister and her children and my parents, and sort of just so we could have the dream of the Aussie backyard and having everyone together, going to the same schools. And we had this lovely house in a flooded neighborhood. When we inspected the house, the real estate agent told us about the floods. He said that it was flooded up to the ceiling in 2011, but we haven't had them for ages. And again, just as a bit of a backstory as well, in 2011, there was some catastrophic floods in Brisbane as well. And Brisbane is ostensibly a giant floodplain. And I don't know why we keep building on it. Like, this is another thing to kind of think about too, is that properties are still being built. People are fixing their properties and living on these still. So 2011, I was here for that. And I'm really grateful in hindsight that I had that experience, because it was knowing what the precursors and what all the signals are leading up to that that actually saved our bacon at the end of the day. My husband's English, so he had no clue. So we were living next to a pony club. It was beautiful. It was so lovely. Looking out on this beautiful vista. And at the beginning of the year, it just rained, and it 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 rained. Brisbane was opening up from COVID as well. Queensland had been sort of shut down from the rest of the world, which meant we didn't have any COVID. So it opened up, and then everybody had it. So our family got it, and we're back to back. And it was also my eldest child. It was his first week of school. So he started school in February 7th. And then February 14th, Valentine's Day, my husband came home with COVID. And so he had it for a week. Then I had it for a week. Mm-hmm. Then Solomon, the youngest, had it for a week. So we were in lockdown for 3 weeks. And the rain, and the rain, and the rain, and the rain, and the rain. And I was just thinking, like, this is not good. This isn't stopping. This is like 2011. That anxiety sort of kicked in. And just that heightened, and also, you know, cabin fever, being locked in with my kids for 3 weeks. And it was a Friday night. And I could see the water like rising across the road up from the paddocks. And I think it was like Saturday morning at like 3 a.m. Actually, the night before I was talking to my mum, and she said, you know, we were laughing. I was like, oh, you know, I bet the thing that breaks us out of our quarantine is like we get evacuated from our house. And she said, look, just call. Like, don't feel ridiculous about it. Like, just phone whenever you need us to come. We'll bail everyone out. Let's just do that. So 5:30 the Saturday morning, I was just up, not sleeping, anxious, looked outside, and just the water was almost up to the road. The Facebook community groups were going crazy, and, you know, like, has anyone seen this? Like, posting pictures, and yeah, that was just, I was like, no, this is 2011. So at 5 a.m, put out the bat signal to the family. Everybody just kind of got in their cars, came straight over by 5:30, and we just loaded in all of the stuff that mattered, you know, the stuff that you would think I would really miss that. So, you know, passports, birth certificates, all of that really important sort of life admin stuff. But, you know, like the kids, like birth records, and, you know, like photos and artwork and lamps, and, you know, the things that make us us. And we're really fortunate that, you know, that my family were so magnanimous and on hand. We were able to just take the stuff with us that mattered, and everything else we just kind of left. And I remember, like, at 5 a.m, like, just barging into Jonathan's door. I'm like, get out, we're evacuating. And he was like, what? Like, he'd been out drinking the night before. It was a bit dusty. Oh, mate, poor guy. Welcome to Australia. And he had no idea. And, you know, we were all just like, oh, we'll go and get some, like, it was just kind of this second nature to anyone that had been there before, like, put in the car, go and get sandbags, blah, blah, blah. And I think we were out of there we did like 2 loads. We were out by 9, and the water was coming up over the street. Like you could hear this deluge where the golf club is, which is 100 meters away. Deluge, like you're standing next to a river. And it was actually like funny because everybody on our street who were all there in 2011 and who all lost everything, they were all kind of, out on the road and checking it out. And there was like this young guy, and he must have been about 12. He was a baby, and he came up to me. He was like, "Oh, were you here in 2011?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I was over at Indooroopilly." And he was like, "Oh yeah, that was rough. Went up to there." And I was like, "How old are you?" And then he looked at us putting everything in the car, and he went, "Oh, are you ditching?" Like, we were the first bit, like, "You're not from around these parts, are you?" kind of thing. Like, we were just kind of like, yeah, just no. And I was like, "No, I'm not. Yes, of course I'm ditching. Like, laters, catch you, bye." No one was moving. No one was doing anything. And yeah, we felt really self-conscious. But by 9:30, like all the streets had been shut off around us. Our next door neighbours had to be, they had to call the SES to come and get them in a boat by 2 p.m. that afternoon. So that's how fast it all went up. Like, it just does not.
Where's the evacuation orders in the mix? Is there?
Oh, none.
That's
None
weird.
at all. No,
Wow.
none. No text messages, no messages to say this is where you can go for sandbags, no preparation, no, nothing. Because we were all banking on this thing of like, we were all told after 2011, and there was this huge inquiry into like, why did 2011 happen? And they said that it was like human error, and that they didn't like let the dams, like let the water out of the dams fast enough, it's had something to do with letting the water levels down. And that dragged on for years. And then they were like, "No, bad humans, we won't do that again. No more floods." And so, we forget quickly as humans. We also forget very quickly as humans in the middle of a housing crisis where flooded properties, everyone's just got panicked, and they've got like fear, and all the houses along our street were all getting sold. And you could tell everyone was like really trepidatious about it because they weren't selling, but then everything just went through the roof and they all sold. And the house that we were in, we were renting while we were waiting for another one to be built. The woman had just bought it like a week before. Wow. So yeah, awful. So Brisbane had just kind of, this collective memory was just completely wiped because people were so scared about buying property and having houses. And it was crazy. Like, it was crazy. It just happened again and worse, and in different ways. Like, I was speaking to some friends, and they were in the north side, which doesn't, like, it didn't flood in 2011, but they got annihilated this time. So you can't predict how it's going to go, and you can't. There's types of flooding. Yeah. So when you buy property here, you look at flood maps. So anyone buying in Brisbane knows to look at the flood map first. But what do we do with that information now? Like, we've got the message, and going back to what you were saying before, Andrea, with the dead assets, like, that's the entire neighbourhood now, and it's devastating. And it's devastating. Like, we know so many people that have lost their homes. Insurance still isn't paying out. Still. This happened on the 27th of February. Yeah. And insurance still haven't paid people out. People are living off their savings. People were staying with friends like us. And just the knock-on effects of what happens when I think in Brisbane there was 19,000 families that lost their homes. Like, that's 19,000 homes. And yeah, just trying to get back on your feet after that, and the community. And what do people do after that? You know, like, what do people do who have these homes, as you say, like, that are completely gutted now, that they've got no money, they can't rebuild their home, they can't sell their home, they've been there for 30 years. Like, what do they do? Like, that is like, I knew we'd be okay, we'll be fine. And we've been so lucky. And again, like, the positive through this was that, you know, we have networks, we are well supported. My husband and I are educated, we've got jobs. Like, we were in really good stead to handle something like this. And for me, it's the families and anybody that's affected by this that doesn't have those access to the things that we were able to have access to. And even when we were able to access these things, fighting the system, or trying to access the system to get anything from the system, is mind-bogglingly insane. And have you ever seen that film I, Daniel Blake by Ken Loach, about like just that kind of the Sisyphean nightmare of dealing with like
So
government
the guy that has the heart attack.
And then he can't get. And
it's one of the most powerful movies I've ever seen, and real indication of what's wrong in the world. So it's funny. I've never been able to remember its name, but it had been, especially the single mother who was moved from her community to another city because the home in London was full of mold, but then she was moved to another city to get housing, which was equally bad, but she had no community. It's like, all of it. But the systemic sort of, it's like, Australia, you see the amount of money going towards fossil fuels, but emergency services like fire and floods are not being invested in. And those flood maps that you were referencing, as we saw in Pakistan, how relevant are the flood maps? So it's all happening. So if you're just outside the flood maps, you might actually be still a target for a future flood because the weather's getting more and more extreme. So this ignoring it, and well, we've done it before, we'll get through it again. Like, we're in a new phase now. And we have to get ready for it.
Oh, 1000%. And it's that resilient stuff as well. And, like, how do we prepare ourselves for this? And after that happened, like, as Andrea knows, I'm fairly politically motivated by most of my decisions. And I've always considered myself, like, I'm interested in this stuff. I think it's important that we are all engaged and aware and sort of lend our voices to people that don't have the same, platforms as we do. And just, it just absolutely blew my mind how the hypocrisy, the cheap lip service that politicians will pay to get re-elected, to get themselves, like, to make it look like they're doing something. And like, a good example of this was, again, like, Brisbane City itself is LNP, so large L, conservative Tory for international listeners. So Brisbane City Council is like run by the Conservative government, and then you've got the state is run by the Labor government, so the left wing, and nationally, federally at the time, it was, again, the Conservative government. So you've got like all these different tiers of government that are responsible for different things that you've got to learn how to kind of access that, or to lobby it, or to petition it, or to write about. Like, it's just so confusing. It was awful. And to kind of look those local councillors in the eye, like, one of them I know from like school pickups and drop-offs and stuff, like, we're the same age, our kids used to go kindy together, and I just couldn't like face her, because I'm just like, how can you look your kids in the eye and stand for this stuff? Like, you're a politician, and like, you may not be affected by this, but it's so disingenuous to me that then you come out and you're all about helping and the community and rebuilding, and I'm like, the singular way that you are going to help is by acknowledging that this is happening and doing something about it. And I don't know, like, and I feel like, again, going back to the positives, that there were so many people that felt the same way. And that's, you know, in Queensland, where I live, is traditionally like very conservative, and it's a large state, and it's like, you know, like there's big farming populations, and like, yeah, it's very conservative. And we all voted Green. Like, we call it Greensland now. So, you know, like it was pretty incredible leading up to the election, and really scary too, because you're just like, are we going to do this again, guys? Are we going to vote for Are we doing this again? Are we going to do this again? And no, we didn't here in Queensland, thankfully. But still, like, these things take time.
Yeah.
There's, like, still so many people without homes. I couldn't access money that Centrelink owed us, like a lot of money. And Centrelink is like our social services. And yeah, like, I was kind of had my I Daniel Blake moment where I was in Centrelink crying to this lovely woman saying, like, you guys owe me money. Like, I need it now. I've lost my home. I've lost everything. Like, what do I do? And she was like, sorry.
Oh.
There's nothing we can do. And I'm like, look, I know I'll be fine, but like, what if I'm not? What if I wasn't? Do you just say to somebody who doesn't have anything, fine, see you later? You know, all of those kind of things that you just think, if I'm having these problems, if it's so hard for me, like, I dread to think about how difficult these systems are that we currently have in place for everybody else.
Yeah.
And again, housing crisis, you know, like, who can afford to buy a house here? Like, it's insane. Like, it is. And now, who can afford to buy a house that doesn't flood, you know? So it's the knock-on effects of these things that I didn't ever consider. And yeah, like, losing everything you own is horrible.
Yeah. And but there's that example of systemic change that needs to happen right across the board, right? It's not about just getting people out of the floodplains and designing a city that's going to cope with the future. But even at some point, Brisbane will become too hot to live and people will have to migrate away anyway. So how's that going to be managed? Like, the fact that I think that's where my despair sits. It's those conversations just don't even seem to be happening yet, and the urgency is rising every single day.
No, you're so right. And going back to what Sam was saying, I was frantically writing notes at the beginning there. But, you know, what you were saying, Sam, as well, with like, you know, you have these conversations with people and people are in denial. Like, and I understand that. Like, there's a part, like, you know, as a professional procrastinator, I do understand that, putting things off, but like, and especially when it's so massive that you can't get your head around it. But I thought it was interesting when you said, like, there's denial, but, you know, there's people that actively profiteer off it. So, you know, that's like another level of denial. Like, and that's a big thing here too, you know, like, we're a country that's run on fossil fuels. Like, I have the same issues with my own family and having these conversations. I grew up living in mining communities. Like, there's that cognitive dissonance there that, and you just kind of feel like saying, you know, it's okay to say that this is happening, you guys. Like, it's fine. It's not going to, you're not going to deny what you are or who you are or what your job or profession or your sense of identity is if you acknowledge this. what we need to do is acknowledge it and be pragmatic about what we can do together to move forward, rather than just, no, not happening. No, not happening, because it's too hard. Or I find that conversation, for me personally, having these conversations with people puts them in a position of possibly unraveling who they are as a person, and who they've spent their life building as an identity. And that's big, that's big.
And as a parent, like the thing that struck me about this conversation was her son doing a presentation today on Bangladesh and the future water shortages. And I was just thinking, like, when does that conversation between son and dad happen? And then that, how I can't even, like, I'm constantly on my kid's case. But if they turned around and said, well, Mom, why are we living in Malaysia when we have to fly home to Canada to see people every year? It's like, oh, we got a plan for that. But we've got a plan for that. If we didn't, when your kids question what you're doing, that's the moment where I hope that those conversations and that unraveling has to happen. And kind of better it happen that way, where you can't walk away, you can't deny it, you can't shrug it off. You're living with this little person. You owe this little person. This little person's asking you really good questions that you need to think about.
Yeah.
Are those conversations? I'm curious. Andrea and I had talked the last time we did it about this book called "Don't Even Think About It," and one of the fascinating pieces in it is that he does all these interviews with people who've survived Katrina and Haiyan, and he said what was really interesting was everybody talked about community and coming together and working together and but no one talked about climate change.
Yeah.
No one talked about why it happened. Everybody talked about how wonderfully they dealt with it and came together, but they didn't talk about why. Are they talking about why in Queensland? They're voting.
No. Oh, well, yeah. It's complicated. The Greens definitely are. The Greens definitely are. They definitely are. And that was a grassroots campaign. Like, that has been going on for years and years. And it's actually, like, in terms of kind of like political sort of case studies, in terms of like how this is going to affect political change globally, I think is a really interesting example on and especially in Brisbane, which is like such a, conservative stalwart. It's a real bastion for, like, it's honestly, I'm still shocked. The Greens are. And Labor, I think like, but still, again, Labor's socially progressive, but I don't think they're doing anywhere near enough as they could or should for, reducing emissions and transferring from fossil fuels into renewables. What do you think, Andrea? Do you like?
I don't think any. I don't think any of the governments are even remotely close to making the steps that they need to be taking. I mean, we're seeing it in some of the like Scandinavian countries. China, is doing more than practically any country. But that sense of urgency, like the adaptation that needs to happen, and the timescale that we're talking about. Like, if people are going through floods in Brisbane now, I was there during the 2010 flood. I think it was
2011. Yeah.
Was it
January
it
2011.
crossed over.
Yeah,
that's right. We left just before the end of December, and that was a 100-year event. And there's been three of those years in the last decade, right? And so
absolutely,
what we've got to start to sort of come to terms with what's coming, And so let's move on and let's talk about the risks. So last week I mentioned the 6 tipping points that we are very close to reaching. And I'm going to share some articles when I'm not talking here, just as background. So the first is the Greenland ice sheet collapse, and we've seen massive melt of that in September. West Antarctic ice sheet collapse, which is Thwaites or the Doomsday Glacier, collapse of ocean circulation in the polar region of the North Atlantic, so AMOC, coral reef die-offs in low latitudes, sudden thawing of permafrost in the northern regions, and abrupt sea ice loss in the Barents Sea. So these are the 6 tipping points. The Doomsday Glacier is expected to go within the next few years. There's a talk about some aerosol experiment where they're going to put it over the Arctic and Antarctica, which will refreeze the ice, but no one knows, what are the consequences of that going to be? But
such a band-aid solution as well.
I know, but those sort of solutions, we're going to need them, right?
Yeah,
but 2022 is the year the escalation really took off, and it started for me back in February. So what we do now, when we do stuff now, is what matters. But we have to understand we're now moving into a new era for the climate. Stability is no longer on the cards, and humanity prospers when we have stability. So what can we be paying attention to, right? So in our own backyards. So worsening weather. We've seen in Japan this week, as well as Puerto Rico, and that hurricane in Puerto Rico was only a Category 1, but it hung around longer, and it's obviously still doing its damage. Heat waves. What's the hottest temperature you've ever had in Brisbane?
It's actually been quite mild since we've been back, because it's been the El Nino years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's been, but oh God, before I left, just disgusting. Really foul. And it's humid here too. So yeah, the heat is very concerning. Concerning. Very concerning.
Yeah. Definitely. So I grew up more south, and Australia hit its first 50-degree temperature in this last 12 months, right? So once a country hits 50, you're starting to go into the wet bulb temperatures, which means not everyone knows what this means, but basically once you go into the wet bulb temperature range, and that's going to be part of the weather predictions that at some point all of the media will start putting wet bulb temperatures up. But basically you no longer sweat, and it cooks your internal organs. So even a very, very healthy person in the shade with plenty of water to drink will die, right? And around I think it was in August or July, they passed the wet bulb temperature mark. And so that's going to become something that we're going to hear about more. We're going to hit 1.5 this decade, and we're going to taste it before it becomes permanently embedded. We're at 1.2 now, and this is what we're dealing with. So it's going to get worse. But basically, if you're in a country or a place,
Canada hit 50 in 2021 too.
Yeah, right. So that's not,
and then flooded.
That's not a good sign. So once because the temperature is only going to go up. So if it's hitting 50, the number of days it'll be at 50 will be more. But then once you hit 50, then it's starting to move up towards 60, which is obviously completely unlivable temperatures. So that's the sort of direction we're going with temperature. Flooding, obviously, we're in a La Nina year. We're going into the third La Nina year, which means that you're probably all expecting more floods, yeah? Where it's almost a bit of a relief now. We know, at least for the next 12 months, what to expect. But when it goes back to El Nino, then a whole other bunch of other factors will be coming in, including the higher temperatures. So flooding is really important. I think it's criminal, absolutely criminal, that any house has been allowed to be built in a floodplain. And it's not just in the developed world, it's also in developing worlds. Like we saw in Durban in South Africa, people are living in shanty towns on the bottom of the rivers, and they just got washed away when that big rain bomb hit. But obviously in Pakistan, the deniers tried to make it out that the people who were being washed away and the homes that were washed away were because they were illegally built. But then we saw a 150-year-old hotel go down like some matchsticks, right? And that was not in our floodplain, right? So that whole argument. But we need to be looking at floodplains, but also expanding the size of the floodplains, because that's what's going to happen, right?
So recently, we've just bought this house, and again, we had to move 6 times this year, 6 times. So we were evacuated, and we moved underneath my mum's and dad's after, straight away. And then after that, we were able to house sit for a friend. which was so wonderful, for 3 months. And then we house sat for another friend for a month. And then we rented while we were trying to buy for like 6 weeks. So we've moved 6 times. But again, part of that is just the housing insecurity. So again, we've got insane housing markets, complete and utter unaffordability. Like I do not know how, it just boggles my mind. Like I think I read somewhere that the average house price in Australia was $1 million. And that's average over and that is insane. Like that, when did you ever think in your life like that you would live in $1 million property? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And that's just what you need to have to buy a house now. And obviously I know that there's lower ends of this. Like, I get it. But also it goes back to those things that you were saying before, that like, no, like, this is where my kids go to school. This is where they go to kindy. This is our community. Like, it's just unconscionable that like people have bought and lived in houses that have been allowed to build since, and again, 1974 was another massive flood year that we had. And actually my parents were newly married at the time and they lost everything in 1974 as well. Ironically, in Oxley, where we're living now. So same postcode, and they lost everything. Little caravan. And, that was 50 years ago, right? There's definitely houses that have been built on floodplains in 50 years. Definitely. Like, just that kind of stuff. Like, and again, you can't wind back the clock and you can't change that. But we like you said, once in 100 years. No, it's been 3 times in 50. Like 3 times in 50.
10. In 10 years.
Or twice
right?
in 10, yeah. So it's just crazy.
But even that sort of mindset of buying a home, because Queensland's in the tropics, it's close to the equator, so it is going to be more severely impacted by what's going on with the environment. So, like even like my husband would like us to buy something and have some sort of security, but I to this day don't know where to buy, and anywhere on earth. And even that sense of ownership, when you look at the migration of the future, it's migrating once, but be prepared to be migrating more than once. So
Absolutely.
It's not about so this connection that we have to the the Aussie dream or the American dream, like, to me, that's an outdated sort of concept.
Overrated.
Absolutely.
And I think it's it has to change. And Jason and I, similar case. I mean, we lived in Vancouver for 2 years, and talk about a crazy housing market. And
yes.
And our first home that we've ever owned, because we've always lived overseas, and we crash at our parents' house when we get home, even though we're fully functioning adults, was a $1 million townhouse, 1,600 square feet, built in the 1970s, up a mountain, a 45-minute drive away from the city. Like, and I remember just signing this mortgage
It's a
and
good
having
house.
a panic. Well, it's not ours anymore.
Today.
But it was like, I had a panic. I thought, no, this is not the $1 million house in my dream. It has a pool and it has 18 rooms and there's a Rolls Royce out front. Like, what is this? How is this $1 million? And there were lots on our street with teardowns that were $1 million. And it's the same idea of like, we went back overseas again, and now it's our dream house is somewhere with farmland.
Yeah.
And we're not farmers. Like, I managed to grow a couple cucumbers, but like, all I can think of is like, but what our dreams have changed dramatically. And our dream home is no longer a dream home. It's where can we put our kids where they'll be able to grow food? Where can we be near a body of fresh water? Where can we be away from coastlands? Where are we far enough away from a city that if someone wants to come and take what we have, where somebody has to look real hard through a beaver colony to find us. Like, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And
that's
a
why
lot
we
of
have
other
to,
people we know are too.
Yeah, and that's why we have to work it out. We've got Denise here, and we're going to talk about the where in a minute. But the safety, right? And that's why we have to approach it from a community perspective rather than a each for their own. Because each for their own, I was talking about the billionaire bunkers and how they're going about that, and basically they will fail if they go with that approach. But if they go with a community approach and everyone comes together, then we have a chance of succeeding. But so we've obviously got the flooding. The other thing is rain bombs. So we saw it in Durban this year. This incredible amount of rain just fell in one spot, and a whole bunch of people were killed and a massive destruction. And these are important because basically what's happening is this rain is it usually gets picked up and moves across the world, and it lands somewhere where it should land to grow food. And now it's not landing where it should land. So the next point is drought, which obviously we're facing, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Farmers, there's massive crop loss this year, but next year they're not even going to plant their crops because it's not going to grow. So then by the third year, we could be really looking at a global famine, and we need to be thinking about that. And moving our farms into places, that right now they're under ice, but soon that's where we'll be able to grow food. Wildfires. It's obviously a massive issue for many parts of the world now, and even more now. Growing up in Australia, we all grew up with it, but I lived through. But you also have the impact of the haze of smoke, and there's a lot of people living in that. Do you want to live in that? Do you want your children breathing that? I saw it in Singapore with the fires in Indonesia, and it was absolutely disgusting. Oh God, I couldn't stand it. And of course, sea level rise. So if you're living near the ocean, the Greenland ice sheet collapse and the Doomsday Glacier, just those two things together will increase sea level rise by 10 feet. So go and stand at the beach and get a stick and work out what 10 feet looks like. And, here it is. I'm just sharing the climate map, and you can go and have a little look around the world and see what's going on and where it's going on and which beaches are going to be gone. You might be surprised. So sea level rise. Yeah, sea level rise is a big one. I think Queensland's okay for that, right? You guys are up.
Well, this is actually what I meant to say before with regard to buying that. So now whenever you buy a property in Brisbane, and I remember people saying to me when we were looking, and they're like, "Oh, you check the flood maps, don't you?" I'm like, yes, I do check the flood maps. Thank you. I've lost everything to a flood. Of course I'm going to check the flood maps. But it's now this second nature here when people buy, check the flood maps. Have you checked the flood maps? And we've got, so in our flood maps, we've got 3 levels, and they're kind of different, and you can kind of, I'll send you a link to them. You can kind of play around and see. And they've got the different levels of sort of extreme flooding, and it's just second nature now, and it's terrifying. It's really scary. The sea level ones aren't so bad, but the flooding ones are really scary.
And that's the thing, you got to work out for you, right? What's relevant to you, and I think that's important. The other thing is glacial melt, and obviously we saw the devastation in Pakistan, and it's still devastating. It's actually when I first saw that footage, I honestly had never seen anything more horrific, and I'm sure for you, Kate, that was really hard for you to watch. But there's another 33 glacial lakes at risk of collapsing, right? So it's not they're going to be able to rebuild. I mean, they're going to have to look at the entire landmass and work out where can they rebuild within the context of potentially more of this catastrophic waterfall. But it's not just Pakistan. Of course, the Himalayas had passed their tipping point years ago. So everyone down the track of that for drinking water, agricultural water is at risk. And then, of course, in the Swiss Alps, they're melting fast too. And if they go, that will impact millions of people across Europe. So, we're really it's some big stuff, you know. And then of course, you know, add to this ocean life loss, you know, just take one piece of the ecosystem out and you know, we see a collapse, but wider ecosystem die-offs as well. And you know, with the temperatures expected to go up next year with El Nino, you know, we're probably going to see more of the coral reefs, which have rebounded this year, but we'll probably see them potentially sort of heading towards the end of their life. And what's that going to look like? Food scarcity is a thing. We've got to move, like the future bread baskets of the world, Canada, Russia, and Greenland, you know, and most of Greenland is still under ice. So, you know, we need to be moving our farming and our agriculture into areas where it can grow. You know, but then, you know, everyone says go north, and Janice is saying go north, and everything I'm reading is saying going north, but the methane dragon is being released, you know, and what does that mean? What does it really mean? You know, because that's going to accelerate global warming and push more tipping points. Diseases are on the move. Malaria and dengue are moving up north. They haven't been there before. Pandemics, you know, all these animals are going to be crossing each other's paths that have never crossed before. So there's going to be new sort of combinations of viruses and bacteria. We're looking at an insect apocalypse. We're looking at all pollinators dying. But then, you know, then this is where it gets really confusing for me. So the AMOC, which is the Atlantic Meridional, I never say it, current. So think of the movie Day After Tomorrow. So the AMOC stops. It's the best disaster movie of them all. The AMOC stops. It sets off this massive freeze across Europe and the Northern Hemisphere, right? And apparently when the AMOC goes, it's not going to be as extreme as the movie, but it's going to send the Northern Hemisphere into an ice age. Now, if it does that, that means we'll have lots of ice on the ground to reflect the sun back. So maybe that will be the thing that shifts everything around the other way, and then these other parts of the world will be safe that currently aren't safe. So that's why it's really confusing, because there's so many different possibilities in the mix. And anything that you're paying attention to?
There's so much uncertainty. I think that what I try to pay attention to is the fact that I love science. That's why I'm going back to do a master's in science. But I love the noble goal of curiously focusing on evidence without you know, sure, you can have a hypothesis, but your job is actually to disprove your hypothesis.
Yeah.
And if you happen to prove it true along the way, fabulous, right?
Yeah.
And I think, which has instead of become something to really respect when it comes to climate science, has been this little opening that people have tried to kind of widen into disbelief. Okay, well, but they're not certain. They say might. The range is 100 years. They won't equivocally say, you know, they can't predict on October 4th, 2029, this is going to happen. And so everybody likes to kind of take that as the get out of jail free card and say, yeah, well, you know, they're not sure. But no scientist is ever going to say they're sure.
Yeah, no.
Because that is the nature of being a scientist.
Yeah. And I think this like comes down to, again, like a communication thing too. I mean, we saw it in COVID, like, you know, science comms came to the fore and it was able to shine. And, you know, you're right. Like, how do you, that doesn't sell headlines. That doesn't get people interested, saying like, maybe there's going to be, we don't know, you know, like maybe we can't say with any, you know, certainty because science, that's science. But, and I think this is really interesting from like a comms point of view, which is like, I work in communications. I'm really interested in science communication.
All three of us do.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, like I was thinking like, how do you, this is a special like this is another really interesting way of like, how do we communicate this to people and get like, so there's George Monbiot, obviously, but like, I don't know, like who else is doing this well? And I feel like we need to kind of maybe look at what happened with like the COVID comms and kind of go like, how do we get people engaged and wanting to listen, because I feel like if I know it's difficult to kind of, it is doom and gloom, it's horrendous. And I do really respect the Guardian's sort of stance when they changed the language and said, no, we're calling it a crisis now because this is a freaking crisis. But I think I sent you the link to that Journo podcast, Andrea, ages ago, and it was a really interesting look into like how is the media responsible for this, and what's the media's role in shifting behaviors or shifting perspectives, and how can the media get people more engaged. And they were talking about I think they used the case of Vanuatu, and like there's those South Pacific countries which like are going to be obsolete, right? Like they're going to be underwater, but there's some amazing developments there happening. Like they've developed like a new form of, like a new strand of taro root, and there are all these really interesting things happening where they're kind of like, like they've accepted this reality, and the pragmatism that's being employed there. And again, obviously much easier to do, tiny nation, blah, 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 blah. Like you can't pick up the same model and shift it around. But I wonder if there's like another way of, I don't know, like of engaging people in this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. How can I communicate this in a way that people want to hear? But it's actually a separate topic that I want to do as a live stream. So you guys are going to come back and I want to get some media in that conversation as well, and really talk about it, because it's a really big thing. But at the same time, it's also the motivation to listen to this information is about our children's future.
Yeah.
And I struggle with how can that not be enough? But anyway, some other considerations that we should all be sort of starting to really think about is your insurance premiums on your property if you're lucky enough to live in a wealthy country, or one day you may just find out that you can no longer be insured. So, getting out of those properties now before it's too late, if you can. For a lot of people have already going through this, as Kate was saying. Are you buying or renovating a property? Is it worth it? Will you be able to sell it? How much time until your property's on the front line? Recently, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, sticking with Australia, announced that it's got $31 billion worth of mortgages that are exposed to extreme weather risks. So obviously the banks are going to start changing how they do things, and they're not going to help us, right? They're going to help themselves. The cost of land in safer countries is already being bought. And it's not just for the billionaire bunkers. Hedge fund managers and investors are out buying it up in, as much as they can. So the Australian wine industry moved to Tasmania a decade ago because they could see what was coming. So it's going to get harder and more expensive to move. So we need to be thinking about that. And that's really where the community comes in. Moving to cities that take it seriously is one of the recommendations. Was I think it's earth.org. And basically, if the city is investing in its infrastructure to be working at the top level, that's a really good sign. So in New York City, when they got flooded last year and people were dying in subways, they're not ready. In the UK, they're going through a drought. They haven't invested in their water infrastructure for 30 years. So that's a good sign. But I think the most important thing is if you can think we've got to stop thinking about ourselves and think about what does this look like for our children, and what can we do now to make sure that's not as bad as it potentially could be. So, So just some other things, like to jump in with anything. So earth.org, the 3 things to consider if you need to migrate. Geographical advantage, which we'll talk about. The countries putting in the most effort to mitigate, and also the countries that are most likely to adapt. So Japan is a country that is going to get hammered by weather, but it will adapt for that weather. So it's a country you can still live in, even though it might be quite horrendous. But no country can escape sea rise. So what to consider? Cooler areas of the world. So we're going to increase temperatures by between 5 and 6 degrees Fahrenheit. The optimal temperature is 10 to 15 degrees Celsius for humans to have an abundant lifestyle. So that's just sort of something in your mind. So away from the oceans, obviously You've got to get far from the ocean, especially with the rise of the ocean. Erosion and shrunken coastlines are already happening and will get worse. Flooding is already commonplace, and tropical storms and hurricanes are expected to get a lot worse. We're going to lose entire towns and cities, right? Janae said Putin's nukes. Yes, that's another risk. You need to move where there's fresh water access to an elevated area. That's why your home in Canada sounded good, Sam. We need to move away from the equator. I'm living near the equator, so are you, Sam.
Yep.
And I think of Singapore, and Singapore will adapt for as long as it can, but, you can't keep the oceans back, right? Don't go to a small island. They're going to be submerged. Don't go to arid or desert regions unless the precipitation changes and rain will fall on those areas. And I'll tell you about one of them. And don't move near rainforests or woodlands because you'll be in increasing fire danger. So that's just some of the things to be thinking about. So where do we move? What's your feeling of where we move? I've got a whole list of places that I've uncovered.
Well, I've always said, and as a joke, that I married an Englishman to so that my kids wouldn't be climate refugees. And now I'm like, no, not a joke. Deadly serious. Yeah. We also got married in the year of Brexit, and I was like hoping for, European passports for my children. Also not happening.
Yes.
But
that is the crime of Brexit.
Oh,
to me, it's taken away our children's ability to move. Yeah,
absolutely. Like taking away sovereignty. Totally, me too. Absolutely. I don't know, Andrea. I do not know. I mean, yeah, like for me, it's countries that are taking this seriously, and again, for our own personal experience, like we are living on the top of a hill. So if we flood, we've got bigger issues. Like we are all screwed. Like, yeah, we've got a biblical ark situation on our hands. However, we are near woodland, and we had to make that choice. Otherwise, I don't know, like we could move to another suburb, but like our life is in here. So it's where do we weigh all those things up? I'm totally with you on that. I don't know, but we are all here present incredibly privileged to make these choices as well. Yeah. Like we are so lucky that we have these options, and so lucky. And yeah, if the flooding gets too much, and even living in the neighborhood, like I'm expecting it to happen again soon, and it's just incredibly stressful for the entire community. And like I've just set myself up for the expectation that this is just life here now. Like this is a norm for our kids, that this is just going to be it. And I don't want this for my kids. Like I don't want them to go through this all the time. And if there's a way that I can avoid that, I'll do it. But there's some guilt in that as well. Like I'm really aware of that, and I feel terrible about that. And I'm really aware of how this sounds, and I really, really want to stress that I am so aware of this. And it's not like I'm just going to pick up and take my, like just screw everybody else, bye. But like there has been some strategic, we are making strategic plans, as you were saying, Sam, as well. Like, we're making these plans to, save money so that we can do that. We can move our lives around. I'm going back to study so that I can have a degree that's going to allow us to be more mobile as a family. Like all of those kind of forward-thinking decisions that climate and our ease of mobility like definitely takes into consideration there.
Yeah.
But I'm just so sad. What do we do? Well, it's everybody who can't do that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to point out the privilege, because those of us who with that privilege are also part of the problem, that we're part of the problem that has been created, right? So, and that's why if we claim our privilege, I can move my boys to 4 countries based on the passports that they've got, right? And the majority of people I know can't move anywhere, right? So We've got to be part of coming together and working out the solution for the migration so that people can be moved safely and with dignity, and rather than we just all accept being torn apart and end up in civil wars. And I can't bear that as a future for our children.
No.
I don't want my boys living in that future. I'd rather us get washed away, right? So what's Sam?
I have grandiose plans for Canada. Canada doesn't know about them yet. But, we are a nation of immigrants. We're 30 million people, and 8 million of us are refugees. And out of that 30 million, let's talk First Nations numbers. I don't know, 30 million of them, 29.5 million of them are immigrants from somewhere.
Yeah.
And we have always created a nation by welcoming as many people as we can from as many places. And honest to God, our work with UWC Thailand, which is all about deliberate diversity and building peace. My hope is that Canada becomes that place that we go back to help steer a national dialogue around, it's a jump to say nationless states and, whatever. And I know that's
I am here for it, Sam. No, I'm here for it.
Yeah,
Three borders. Yeah.
And I love my Canadian flag on my backpack. I'm very proud.
Yeah.
But if somebody told me tomorrow, okay, the border comes down, the world is in peril, we have the resources, we've got the largest freshwater lakes in the world, and if we don't do this, people are going to die, I'd be like, how do I help?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
My hope is that we keep raising generations of children that see it that way, so that we don't build a wall like our neighbors to the south. And instead, we roll out the welcome carpet and figure out, come on, Canada is a freaking huge country. 9.9 million square kilometers, okay? And 90% of our population lives within 10 miles of the US border or something insane. We're all at that border. And then there's the polar bears in Churchill. There's a lot of country there that's not being used. So
and it hasn't been able to, right? So
because Canadians nobody wants to live in Winnipeg. I'm sorry, Winnipeg, people who live in Winnipeg. But nobody dreams of living in Winnipeg, right? We call it Winterpeg. It won't be Winterpeg anymore. But there's just so much land and opportunity, and for the most part peaceable and accepting. And I really think Canada can be part of a global solution. And our hope is to go home and try to drive that narrative that says we will be a place.
Sam.
Yeah. Well, I did hear that Alaska's going to have the same temperature as Florida by 2047. So if you're scared of the winter, it's not going to hang around for long. So look, we need to wrap up because I know that we've all got different things to do. But I want to go through. I've been collecting the places where we can live and thinking about them from multiple angles. But this is a collection from multiple publications and science and stuff. So earth.org are saying New Zealand, Iceland, UK, Australia, and Ireland. So when Australia's mentioned, it really surprises me. Yep. But it's mainly Tasmania when it gets mentioned. So don't get too excited. But the good thing about all of these is that they've all got smaller populations except for the UK. They all have large agricultural land, which is obviously critical, direct access to the sea for shipping, and they're isolated, which means they'll be less embroiled in economic and social instability. And the other key thing is, of course, they're all energy independent. So on other lists, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and the UK. So the UK gets a couple, but, if AMOC goes, it's going to be freezing. In the US, it's Boston, the Great Salt Lakes, Denver, Colorado, because that's up. Upstate New York and Pacific Northwest, like Portland and Seattle, are all looking good, even though we've seen extreme temperatures go through them. I talked about Japan earlier. Northern Thailand, so up in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, it's the only place that I've seen mentioned in Asia, near the equator especially, which is potentially livable. Canada, Greenland, Siberia, and Russia. Northern Central European countries like Latvia and Estonia. Yeah, Serbia is going to be massive. So is Russia. In fact, here's one article, the Russia in the Mix piece, really important one. Iceland, Nordic
Like the
nations,
farming
Scotland. Just about, yeah, Russia's.
farming?
Yeah. And then down south, it's Patagonia, Australia, as I said, but mainly Tasmania and New Zealand. However, the Doomsday Glacier is going to come out, going to slide into the sea, and it's predicted to set off a tsunami. What impact will that have? So that needs to be thought about. I've also seen a map of 2100 where the precipitation changes around the world will be so vast that there's a desert area north of Perth at the moment that will be green. And finally, in Antarctica, there will be 17,000 square kilometres of new ice-free land where they're expecting humans to also migrate. So there's another sort of topic. It's called north of the 45 degree N parallel. And this is from Michigan in the US to France, Croatia, Mongolia, and Xinjiang in China. And this is seen as so basically from there up, it's seen as the 21st century boomtown area. Like I said, Alaska is going to be like Florida by 2047. And they're looking at this as there'll be a hub of connected Arctic cities. So, if you're down south, do you move down south where there'll be a smaller population, or do you move up north where there'll be a larger population? And when you think of your children, like what's the opportunity?
Money. Yeah.
Or more war, more instability, so it's kind of interesting, And finally, the most vulnerable, Africa, Middle East, South America, the tropics, anywhere near the equator, and developing nations. So if you think of a country like Haiti, that's pretty much screwed. So I've been doing that research for years and years and years. I still don't have a definitive answer, but yeah, you're lucky to be from Canada. We're lucky to have access to UK passports, but we do need to give people the freedom to move, because to build these new cities, we're going to need people to be building them, and we have to take care of the people who didn't create this. We have to, and they need to be part of it. So, yeah. What else?
Oh, man.
You're welcome to come live on my beaver colony.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Good hats at the beaver colony.
We're going to have a compound of people trying to make a difference in the world.
I love it. Oh, my God.
Not a bunker. Not a bunker.
No. No bunker vibes.
A place people are welcome.
Yeah, can you imagine? It's like we've got a decision to make. We're heading towards a dystopia, that Mad Max future. And, you just saw the far right ascendancy in Italy. Bolsonaro hopefully won't be elected soon, but he's going to create, Danae said beaver colony, LOL. I'm with him. When you said it, I was like,
It's a proud and noble animal and a climate hero.
Yeah. So any nationalism, any political rhetoric which is divisive, anything that's sort of shutting down, or blaming one small group of people or a minority, any leadership like that, like we can no longer afford to vote in people who aren't paying attention to what we need to do. And we need to, I'm with you, Denise, and we have to come together, and we have to make this future possible. We can't let it happen the way, because it's going in the wrong direction. We have to say, this is what we want, and this is how we want it to look. Otherwise, what we're doing is setting our children up for absolute horror, whether it's by weather or just social instability. So, and I'm calling on all the parents of the world. It looks like Kate might have frozen up. I'm calling on all the parents of the world to step up and do this. Oh, looks like we lost Kate. So there you go. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's the conversation we had before. We have to talk about it. People have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Everyone has to talk about it, because the
Yeah.
data says people don't talk about it because they're fear of being excluded and fear of not belonging, which is hardwired into this Cro-Magnon brain of we need to have a tribe to survive. But this is the opposite. We need to talk about it to survive.
Yeah. I think there's also the advantage if you're not talking about it and you're planning for something, so you can go and buy the land before the land gets too expensive. You know, I think there's a self-protection aspect in that mix too. And I understand it. I really do. I understand it. But that's the thinking that got us into this problem in the first place. You know, taking care of ourselves. We've got to think about community. How do we take care of our community? How do we feed everyone? You know, if we're going through famine, how do we make sure that there's food growing in communal gardens all over the countries or cities that we're living in? You know, how do we get ready? And
yeah, but you also can't take care of anyone else if you haven't taken care of yourself too, right?
That's right.
There's that argument, right? Like,
yeah.
If you've got yourself sorted, then you can focus all your energy on helping other people. If you're focusing on how you're going to feed your family, then that also contributes to this eye for an eye, you know,
Yeah.
I'll come after you for your garden or your whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's both, right? All right. Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening in. I hope it's useful, but the key question is really start paying attention to what's going on in the environment as far as it impacts you and your family and your community. It's not like before. It's accelerating. It's getting worse. It's getting more extreme. We need to, we're just bringing Kate back in now to say goodbye. It's getting more extreme. You know, we need to take it seriously. Let's do it. And let's come together. You have to make the noise, Danae said.
I'm so glad I came back for this. Sorry, tech issues.
No, it's okay if you haven't. But thanks so much, Kate. I really appreciate you coming and sharing. And best of luck. I hope you find your home and you guys can be happy for a few years without any more trauma.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, we're definitely feeling much more settled. But thank you. And thank you for having me. And it was lovely to meet you, Sam.
You too.
All right, I'm going to end the broadcast. So see you later, guys.
Okay, bye.
See you in a few weeks.
Bye.
All right.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye.